Welcome to episode 308 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Bet365, our sports betting partner, just in time for the 2024 playoffs. We'll be here with Bet365 to provide you all the news, analysis, lines, and betting options for the playoffs until one team is left standing. 4 remain, and it's a best of 3 in the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. Should be great. I'm Jason Gregor. We'll welcome in Frank Saravalli, fresh off the old red eye from Edmonton, getting into Philadelphia. Frankie, how you doing?
I've had better mornings. 11 hours ago, you and I were standing together in the press box in Rogers Place for an electric Game 4 between the Oilers and Stars. And, you know, the red eye always sounds good in theory. And then you step off the plane and you feel like an absolute bag of dicks. And you just regret every decision you've made.
Now, you can't sleep on the plane, can you?
Well, I can a little bit, except the person in the window seat decided to leave the shade open. And it's, you know what it's like. You're so far north. So first off, the amazing part about going to see an Oiler playoff game is you walk outside after the game ended, provided that it's in regulation, and it's still light out.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're that far north and you're flying, the sun comes up at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
And that person decided to leave their window shade open, which meant it was sunny inside the plane at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, I just reached over. That's where I just reach over and say, excuse me, we got to close that.
But she was awake. There was nothing I could do. Like, it was a conscious choice by her to try and not sleep. And I was like, you are blowing it for the rest of us. And that was after, by the way, we had a guy, must have been an Oiler fan, that just stumbled through the aisle as we were taxiing all the way up to the front and puked all over the bathroom to the point where we had to go back to the gate and they had to physically remove this man from the plane.
No.
Yeah. They said, they came on the speaker and they were like, yeah, we have a passenger that's unwell. Like, yeah, no kidding. Mix in a water, bud. Christ.
Oh, that is brutal. See, if you need to invest in the sleep eye patch, because then it doesn't matter. See, I'm lucky. I can sleep on a plane. Like, I've taken a few red eyes, and I'll be out before we even taxi. I love it. So the red eye in that sense is good if you can sleep. But that
I wrote my story for the first hour or hour and a half.
Oh, yeah.
So that just, yeah. Anyway, I'm not complaining. It's a privilege to be there. But I could have also just taken the early flight and, actually slept in a bed. So
yeah, well, we could have done the pod late last night. The Oilers, hey, we got both conference finals now, best of 3s. You know what? You had Florida needing a win on home ice in Game 4. They get it done. The Edmonton Oilers, same thing. They get it done. What do you make of these series? Do you see any team in the best of 3 now that you favor more than the other?
Well, from a process perspective, it's hard not to favor the Florida Panthers. Like, you could make the real argument that they should be up 3-1. Should and would and could, those words don't really matter when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And this next part is probably going to surprise people, but I would also, depending on the severity of Chris Tanev's injury, I would also favor the Oilers in the West. The Dallas
I was going to
Stars,
ask you, Frank, do you want to change your pick?
I want to know more about Chris Tanev's injury, because there were whispers last night that exiting Rogers Place, Chris Tanev was in a walking boot.
Yeah,
and we've seen Chris Tanev play hundreds of games. It felt like every other game this season, Chris Tanev was going down the tunnel to walk off a block shot. When he doesn't come back, that guy, Jamie Benn, said after the game, he's one of hockey's ultimate warriors. When he doesn't come back in a game, something's wrong. And for a team that was already playing 5 defensemen as it was, to go down to 4, and one of them is Ryan Suter, look out. Significant advantage Edmonton if Chris Tanev's out.
Yeah, I was told by a source that Tanev, was sitting on the bench, took one step on the ice, came back. It's like, I got to get off the ice. So you saw him go down the tunnel. He was in clear discomfort. Like, it's Evander Kane shot. You watch the replay and you saw him on the bench, Frank. I don't know if you saw it, where, that he's one of the old school guys who I think is smart. He wears those shot block protectors.
Yeah, he took it off as soon as he got back.
Yeah, took it right off. So, you know what? It's amazing. I'll be honest. When you consider how many shots are blocked in the NHL by guys, it's stunning to me when you consider how many bones there are in the foot, that more guys don't have broken bones in their feet. Now, maybe some do and they play through it, but man, there's not a lot of protection in those skates when you think about it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Even if the bone is broken, I don't think you can necessarily rule Chris Tanev out. It depends which bone. It depends if it's weight bearing. It depends on a whole bunch of things. It also depends, can they inject it or not? Like, there's a whole lot of stuff that could get Chris Tanev to 80% in the lineup for Game 5 on Friday night. But if he's not, which I think you have to allow for the possibility, given that Pete DeBoer said, quote, fingers crossed, man, oh man, are the Stars in a tough spot. Alex Petrovic, like, I wrote this today and people were tweeting at me saying, you're an idiot. Can't believe you think that the Oilers are deeper than the Stars. It's not opinion anymore. On the blue line, it's fact now. And yes, there are players on the Oiler blue line that have struggled. But Alex Petrovic has played 5 consecutive full seasons in the AHL. 5. He's been in the AHL since the Oilers let him go in 2019 under Peter Chiarelli. Ken Holland is finishing a 5-year contract since then. So he's stepped into the lineup. Nils Lundqvist has been a healthy scratch. If Tanev's out, I'd imagine he's the guy that draws back in. But they obviously don't trust him. He played 4 minutes and 28 seconds a game average over 12 playoff games so far before then moving to a healthy scratch. So you're talking about Petrovic and Nils Lundqvist if Tanev can't go as your 5-6. Now, I've seen Stanley Cup playoff runs, and in fact, the one that really stands out for me is the Flyers Blackhawks in 2010. Their third pair was getting 27 to 35 seconds a game. So they weren't playing. You can look up the numbers in the Stanley Cup final. It was unbelievable. Ryan Parent and Lucas Krajicek, I believe, were the two guys that were in the lineup. You can get away with it, but did you see Ryan Suter in Game 4? All 4 of your guys have to be really dependable, and Ryan Suter did not look good in Game 4.
No.
So am I overstating it? The importance of Chris Tanev in terms of the overall health of their defense?
Well, I think for sure it's a factor. There's no question. I look at the series and, Edmonton's led now in the series for 85 minutes. Dallas has had a lead for a total of 47 minutes in the series. Before Tanev was in, I thought the series was very even. And you take him out, and to me, it's kind of twofold. You take Tanev out, and then you have, if Darnell Nurse plays like he did in Game 4, well, that's almost like a 2-player swap, Frank, because you're taking Tanev out, and Darnell Nurse has really elevated his game. He had his best game of the playoffs by a mile.
Yeah, he was engaged. I knew right after watching that media scrum on Wednesday morning that you were going to see a good game from Darnell Nurse. I don't know if that lit a fire under him, the coverage of the previous 24 hours, but that looked like a guy that was like, oh yeah, that's what you think of my game? I'll show you.
Wow. Well, and Leon Draisaitl said it afterwards. He goes, hey, you know what? Maybe he didn't have the confidence that we're kind of used to. And, he came back and really simplified his game. He had 12 hits in that game, Frank. He had 11 hits in the entire series, 7-game series against Vancouver. He was much more physical in that game. And more importantly, he used his feet. He's the best skating defenseman on the Oilers. It's not really close. And he used his feet to close up gaps. He got in on guys quickly. He wasn't backing in and sitting back. He wasn't passive. And
he was the best word is engaged.
Yes. But he was also, he was confident in attacking, not sitting back. He's their best skater. Like, go to the guys, and if a guy gets a step on you, he normally can catch him. He has some of the best recovery speed in the league. So, he wasn't backing in. He started off the opening goal, had an assist, was really good on the penalty kill again. But yeah, so if you have a Tanev going out, Nurse coming up and playing to his capabilities, That's massive. Not to mention that Kris Knoblauch, I don't know what it is, Frank, with him and his whiteboard in his coach's room, but every time he makes a change in his lineup, the players respond, right? He takes out Stuart Skinner, he sits him for 2 games. Pickard plays well. Skinner comes back in, solid. Ryan McLeod, healthy scratch, comes back in. Not only puts him back in, but puts him on the wing, not center, scores his first goal of the playoffs. Corey Perry sitting out 5 games, creates chances, gets an assist on the opening goal. Brown had sat out. Now he's got a 3-game point streak, but I got to give Kris Knoblauch credit because he not only brings guys in, he's not afraid to change. Brett Kulak hasn't played right defense all year, and he played him on right defense last night.
It's been methodical. Like everything's had a well-defined reason. It's not just, hey, we're making change for the sake of making change, which some people not following it closely might have looked at it and said, wait, you lost 1 game and you're taking out 3 healthy players? That almost never happens. No. But Dallas is a different team than Vancouver. You put Corey Perry with the right players and deploy him properly, all of a sudden they're able to establish some forecheck and the cycle. He's not going to be the first guy in, but once they get the puck, Corey Perry does a pretty good job protecting it and doesn't give it up. And that's how they were able to create some chances. It's also, and the Broberg edition I thought was sublime. Like, with all due respect to Vinny Desharnais, Broberg is a miles better skater, and this Stars team is fat. They play fast and they stretch the ice. And watching Broberg absorb the forecheck, I thought was incredibly impressive. He had no issue with it whatsoever. So it's the additions, which are important, but it's also knowing which players to keep in. You mentioned Brown. He was brutal this regular season, but he's been a great playoff performer. And it's not just the odd goal that he's chipped in here, there, or play. It's been 23 consecutive kills that he's contributed to. It's, hey, it would have been easy to make a convincing argument to take Derek Ryan out of the lineup. They didn't do that either. So I think there's a ton of courage and conviction in what Kris Knoblauch has drawn up that has helped make the Oilers successful.
And so speaking of lineup changes and maybe just line changes, Frank, let's go to the East and the New York Rangers. And you've got Alexis Lafreniere, who's, if he wasn't on his game, I don't know where this series would be because he's been unreal for the New York Rangers. And, the Rangers are tied 2-2. And really, they're still kind of waiting, and not kind of. I think they're waiting for Panarin and Kreider to make their stamp, make an appearance in this series. And if they do, in a best of 3, and you've got Shesterkin playing as well as he has, suddenly, that series looks a lot different, Frank. But those guys got to get going. Like, I'll give the Rangers depth guys, and specifically Lafreniere, like, oh my goodness, his best play didn't even result in a goal last game.
Yeah.
When he danced around the blue line, came in, and ripped it off the bar. You're like, oh my goodness, like this guy, he's only 22 years of age, but he is really emerging. It's another example when people want to use the word bust because a guy who's 18, 19, 20, 21 hasn't dominated the NHL yet, you might want to pump the brakes. But they really need, though, their 2 big guys to go, Kreider and Panarin. What do you make of the fact that they really, have kind of been MIA in that series?
It's really surprising. Is that stat correct that Sergei Bobrovsky has more points this series than Mika Zibanejad?
Yeah, I think so. I'll double check, but I think so.
I mean, how? That's crazy. So there's 2 ways to look at it. Do you say, okay, look, Florida's controlled gobs of play, 75% of it. And we kind of knew that might be the case because the Rangers don't have great even strength numbers and haven't all season. So do you look at it like Florida's in control, or do you look at it like, well, the Rangers haven't gotten their stars going. They haven't really scored on the power play. It's 9% in this series. And yet they haven't really played a good game and they're still tied. Like which one would you lean on more in terms of being the more realistic outcome? that the Panthers have controlled play, or the Rangers just really haven't shown up yet and are still tied 2-2.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. I said Panarin. He has 3 apples. It's Zibanejad, who I was talking about, him and Kreider. But Panarin
that's what I said, right? Zibanejad?
Yeah, no, you said Zibanejad. I'd said Panarin. Okay. So just want to clarify. I had the wrong name. But you can always look at it both ways. Like it's one where in short series, like if there's 4 regular season games where a guy doesn't get a point, it's not looked upon as that big of a deal. Guys will go 3 or 4 games without a point. But when you're in a short 7-game series, usually your best guys got to be your best guys. And the great part about the Rangers is I would look and say, you know what? Mika Zibanejad's been a pretty good playoff guy for us. We saw Chris Kreider last series. You know what? He was a man against Carolina. Basically, won them game 6. It was unreal. One of the best third periods we've ever seen. So, they're capable of it. And if all of a sudden those guys start producing, well, if you're the New York Rangers, it's like, hey, you know what? We got here. Maybe we shouldn't be here, as you alluded to earlier, Frank. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. All that matters is they're 2-2. And now all you got to do is win 2 out of 3 games, and you got 2 of them at home. So I would say the Rangers overall, you know what? They exhale. And I think Zibanejad, if you saw his post-game reaction after what led to the overtime goal, right? He made the bad choice on the pass in the offensive zone. It led to the jailbreak. Florida gets the breakaway. They have to take a penalty, and then they score in the power play. And he owned up to it right away. Didn't shy away. He just said, I can't make that play. I got to make a way better pass. And, sometimes as odd as it sounds, those are the things that jumpstart a guy. And it's almost not that you're playing guilty, but you're just like, okay, I got to do something here. Because sometimes if you're not scoring, but you're not giving up any goals, you can live with it. But when you have zeros across the board and you're -3 in the series, Frank, well, then it's a big problem. And so to me, the Rangers, they'll have a chance in the series if they can get Zibanejad and Kreider going.
Totally fair. And the Rangers have, like the Stars, 2 out of 3 at home if you need it.
Although, home ice usually in games, we see it later in the playoffs. It matters more. So we'll see. MSG will be rocking without question. What about lineup changes there? What do you think they'll do for game 7? Game 5.
So Heedle's been out.
Yeah, he rested him, right? He just said, you know what? The guy's come back from injury. I think you put him back in if he's ready to go.
Agreed. Who else has sat out? Has Cooley sat out?
If you look in this series, the Wheeler, like the guys who have kind of come in, Wheeler, of course, has come in late. Rempe sat out 1 game. Kako has sat out 1 game. Heedle sat out 1 game.
They've kind of rotated, right? So
yeah,
I'd be looking for my most optimal lineup. I'm going Heedle. I think Wheeler provided probably an emotional lift. I'd be real curious about his pace. That's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. I think I could see them maybe taking Rempe out of the lineup for that game. So, and then you got Florida on the other side. They're probably feeling pretty happy about themselves, right? In the sense that, hey, we're 2-2. We feel for long stretches we've been the better team. Now we just have to be the better team when it matters, right? And their top guys are coming around, like Sam Reinhart's huge goals again. You see Barkov. I love Paul Maurice's answer after the game. If that was a penalty shot, he goes, well, we're 1 for 3 in penalty shots, or 1 for 3 in breakaways, we're 1 for 3 in the power play. I don't care. Now, had they not scored on the power play, then you'd be saying that should be a penalty shot, because that's kind of how it is. But I look at Florida, Frank, and I agree with you. I think they've controlled more of the series to this point, but they're even. And that's always the risk sometimes in a series, is just because you've controlled it to this point doesn't guarantee you'll control it moving forward. So,
that's what I was saying. It's like your golf scorecard. There's no pictures. They just count up the scores. So depends on how you feel about it. What's your mindset going into it? Didn't seem like the Oilers' mindset was great going into game 4. They were sleepy to start.
It's been a very weird series.
This is honestly one of the most odd series I can ever remember. There's no animosity. There's no healthy hate. No. The only emotion that exists in this series is the wild momentum swings. And even then, they're not emotional. The only drama that exists is because of what's at stake. That's it. No. I can't remember a series like this.
Well, teams can't hold. They haven't been able to hold leads. Like if you have a 2-0 lead, you're like, oh my God, we're going to lose the game.
One other thing that hasn't really been talked about is the Oilers kind of cracked Jake Ottinger. He gave up 7 in the 2 games in Edmonton. The most he had given up in a road game so far these playoffs was 2.
Yeah.
The Oilers did it on back-to-back nights, 3 and 4. That's interesting.
Well, I said it earlier. There was so much talk about Edmonton's defense. The fact of the matter is, Edmonton's offense is their main thing. Their power play still doesn't have a goal in the series. Their penalty kill has more. Yeah, but their penalty kill
power play unit has a goal in this series. The only special team unit that scored in the entire series is the Oilers penalty kill, which has 23 consecutive kills, by the way, and is leading by a 1-0 margin on special teams in the series overall. Who had that on their bingo card?
That's why it's earlier when you mentioned who has more points, Zibanejad or Bobrovsky. Well, if you would have said, hey, the Oilers penalty kill is going to have more goals than the Oilers power play, you'd have said, get the hell out of here. But that's where it's at. Now, there hasn't been a lot of penalties. We should make that clear. There's not like there's a lot of penalties. It's been a very disciplined series. It's been very odd. And like you said, there was actually, Frank, because I think last night had 3 scrums. That might have been the most in any game this year. So in this series. So it is odd, but I think that, that favors.
I can't even remember them.
Yeah, it was there was the one in the corner. It was Nugent Hopkins and Wyatt Johnson had a little one.
That doesn't even count. That's 2 featherweights. And
then there was Nurse in another one, but very, very short-lived. You're right. Like I'm kind of being facetious here. There has been no
the Pete DeBoer MO. They don't want to play that way. They're programmed to take the fewest penalties in the playoffs, the second fewest penalties in the regular season. They don't get dragged into it. And I'm not saying you need to. There hasn't even been when there's been a giant hit, there was some hint yesterday. Did Leon Draisaitl get butt-ended in the face? I didn't see that. All I saw was a glove. But even those situations, there's no pushback. There's no, scrum. There's no grabbing a guy, nothing. It's very odd.
Yeah. Well, it's fast paced. I think I wrote about it. I talked about it before, and everybody talked about Dallas's depth, and I thought it was overrated that Dallas's depth was significantly better than Edmonton's, and that's what we're seeing so far in the series. There hasn't been a huge, I'll say the one thing we haven't talked about, Jamie Benn has been unreal for the Dallas Stars in this series. And I think Benn has what has he got? 7 points, I think. I think he's tied with McDavid for most points in the series. He has been a force for them, great in the face-off circle. He's a big reason why him and Sagan, they're winning some penalty kill face-offs. And that really, the Oilers usually kill you on the power play because they win the face-offs. Draisaitl's face-offs aren't as good. His left finger's probably playing a factor in that. But, man, you look at Jamie Benn, and I can make a strong argument that he's been Dallas's best player start to finish in this series. And by a fairly large margin, he's been physically engaged. He's almost averaging 2 points a game. He's been awesome.
Honestly, by a wide mark, I don't know. I think he's been good. I don't know. I don't know that I'd jump and say by a wide margin, but yeah, interesting thought. I mean, yeah. I'll have to watch that part of it more closely.
Yeah, you just watch the subtleties of his game, man. He's been good defensively. He's good. He just makes smart plays all over the ice, I find. And he's just doing a lot of the real small details exceptionally well for Dallas in this year. And the other guy who I don't get to see enough, Frank, but I'll tell you, Roope Hintz is one of the more exciting, fun players to watch in the game. The guy, first of all, he can flat out fly, but there's guys who are fast. And then he reminds me a little bit of how he skates. And I know it's the same organization of Mike Modano. Modano, I know his jersey would flap out, so it's a little bit different, but you watch Roope Hintz go and watch how smooth he is. He is such an effortless skater for a big man. God, he's good. And
he also it's details. He plays against the top competition. He got a Selke vote from me this year. He
was 6th, right? He was 6th in Selke.
Yeah, he was in my top 5. I mean, this is a guy that does all the little things right. He's a legitimate, true top 5 number 1 center in this league.
Wow, I really like him, man. The more I've been watching the 2 games in Edmonton, and when you get to any player you get to watch live for most nights, I get more of an appreciation. I've always liked him from afar, but Dallas fans, that guy is really special and fun to watch. There's just not many guys who can skate like that.
It's going to be so fascinating to see what happens with Chris Tanev. I really think a huge part of this series hinges on it. I mean, think about, like, again, this depth conversation. Like, who would have thought that the Oilers would be getting such meaningful shifts from, this is at even strength. Like, I'm not talking about the penalty kill, from Matthias Janmark at even strength. Big shifts in the third period of game 4 to help salt away that two-goal lead. You know, the fact that you could drop in Broberg for Desharnais, the fact that you have a 50-goal scorer that's a 4-time Stanley Cup finalist in Corey Perry. Not everyone has that in their arsenal to drop into a series. And Leon Draisaitl said it after the game. He goes, our guys are good enough that they're making these decisions hard. Not every team has that.
Hey, speaking of decisions, let's get to another coaching vacancy filled since we've last spoke. Dan Bylsma coming back from the American League. I like what he said in his press conference. You know what? I went to the American League and I rediscovered my love of coaching. Right? I'm sure it can be stressful and high pressure when you're in the NHL all the time, and you go to the American League and it's, you still want to win, but it's different. You're working with the younger players at times. It's a lot more about development, and there's not as much spotlight. And so he's really enjoyed it. He's had really good success. What do you make of this hire by Ron Francis in Seattle?
I'm really curious to see how different he is. I think it's interesting that he worked in Pittsburgh and 2 guys later was succeeded by Mike Sullivan, because Sullivan got a crack early in his career and was in the AHL for a long time. Dan Bylsma has gone 7 full seasons between NHL head coaching jobs. He was an assistant. He went to the AHL. He helped, start up Coachella Valley, and they've had nothing but success. You mentioned that he rediscovered his love of coaching. This is a guy that stepped into the NHL and helped the Penguins to a Stanley Cup in 40-some games. They had a ton of spectacular playoff failures in the subsequent years that ended up costing him his job. And somewhere in there's a really good coach that then wore the stink of the Buffalo Sabres for a really long time. So he's got the resume and track record, and people would knock this hiring and say, oh, a retread. Why do we need a retread? Like, why don't people have the ability to reinvent themselves?
Yeah, and see, I agree with you, because to me, like, when you're out, the last time he was a head coach in the NHL was 2017, right? He was an assistant. He took the 17-18 year off, and then he went to an assistant with Detroit, and then spent 3 years, 1 year as an assistant in the A, and then, as a head coach in the AHL. And, that would look almost, Frank, like a guy, you mentioned Alex Petrovic here, a little bit different, but, long time in the American League. Now he's getting a chance in the playoffs. Some guys just need a new opportunity. Maybe Dan Bylsma just had to get the fire again. Maybe he had to change his approach in some way or the other. Although, you look at his success in Pittsburgh, they were always a playoff team, right? They won a cup. They went to the conference final. They won 2 rounds, at least 2 other times. So pretty successful 6-year span as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then Buffalo, and I don't care who the coach of those 2 teams in Buffalo, they weren't going to do anything, right? Like, you could have put the best 3 coaches in NHL history on that bench, and they were making the playoffs. So I'm kind of intrigued by it. It's still about relationships too. I think that's always a part of it, right? Ron Francis knows Dan quite well, right? So I get it. And now
it's actually the more important relationships are the ones that Dan Bylsma had with their young players.
Fair point.
That's way more intriguing to me than anything with Ron Francis. And not for nothing, I would love to inject some truth serum into Kraken ownership to ask the question, what do you think of the job Ron Francis has done to this point? You're 3 years in, you've already gonged your head coach. You had one sort of miracle run in a season and playoffs that was a statistical outlier for a million reasons. You don't have very many game breakers, and I don't see a path for them, at least as it stands right now, to go from mediocrity to being a contender really anytime soon. Am I selling short Matty Beniers?
Yeah, I think.
Am I selling short? Pick another player.
Yeah, like Shane, Shane Wright, and we talked earlier in the pod about Alexis Lafreniere. Like hey, Matty Beniers had a great rookie season, man. The NHL is really hard, and it's hard to be consistent every year. We see veterans struggle with it. Shane Wright, because he was he's rated number 1, then he went number 4. Then he went to go back to junior, and he didn't light it up, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, Shane Wright's terrible." I'm like, you know what? He might not be, a 90-point player right out of it, but there's lots of top picks who aren't great out of the gate. And it just take a little bit of time. Everybody's development curve is different. I think Seattle, Frank, when I looked at Seattle's expansion draft strategy, to me, they're right where they should be. I thought from the get-go, their strategy was they were going to build more so. And I think maybe they've
probably been too good though.
Well, lightning hit a bottle. Like when you have
I'm saying is they're not getting the upper echelon difference makers that you need to in a draft. Like it's really black and white for me, and probably sometimes the Dallas Stars are a great example that it doesn't need to be if you draft well enough. And look, Jagger Firkus at 35th overall, like that's going to be a home run. It just is. Riker Evans, he's looking good. Like that's going to be an important pick. Also at 35th overall. Like there are certainly some hits here. And Ron Francis has had a lot of them going back to Carolina, drafting certainly. But I'd like to see them get that. You need a couple top 5 picks. That's what helps transform your franchise.
No, it's fair. And they had 2 of them early. And you're right. I do think that the, last year, like it was lightning in a bottle, right? Your whole fourth line, everybody's scoring. Like it was amazing what they did, but I didn't think it was repeatable, right? But it's hard as a GM. You build a team, you want to be competitive. And then you have a bunch of guys collectively on your team all have career years at one time. You're like, well, I didn't really think that would happen. So you're right, though. It's hard. Like it's hard to be bad. It might sound like you've got to go scorched earth like Chicago to guarantee to be super bad. You know what I mean? Or get a lot of injuries.
Be bad. I have to
like
think
it
about
is
this.
When you think about the teams that some teams have really horrible injury problems one year, and then the team goes way worse than you think. But I think it's a pretty big skill to be that shitty consistently every year. Like you almost have to purposely be bad.
It'd be amazing if life was like that.
Well, it can be at times. Hey, let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk to the pod. Ty, how you doing? Hey, rookie.
You have been muted the whole time you've been talking. Congratulations.
It's my first time back in 3 episodes, so you can cut me some slack on that, right?
No, we can't.
Damn. All right. Well, I'm back with a new edition of Fill in the Blank. It's brought to you by Wendy's. Wendy's only ever uses fresh, never frozen Canadian beef in all of their burgers. So whether it's a JBC, a Dave Single, or a Baconator, you can guarantee that beef has never seen the inside of a freezer. Download the Wendy's app today to check out the latest deals. Today's Fill in the Blank is going to be all about Frank's new trade targets board. First one of the offseason, I guess you could say, up now at dailyfaceoff.com. So my first one is about the first name on the list, and it's Mitch Marner. One team that should be interested in Mitch Marner is blank. Frank? Who's looking for offense? Who's looking for a high-end winger?
The Chicago Blackhawks.
Ooh.
Cap space, Connor Bedard down the middle. But my concern would be first off, you have to give up something for Marner, right? So that's the first part. And then the second part would be then you need to pay Mitch Marner. So what's Mitch Marner's next contract? And then what does Mitch Marner's next contract mean for Connor Bedard's next contract? Then you start to do the permutations and you go, ooh, I don't know if that makes sense. It's an interesting idea, and it's exactly the type of player that Chicago should be trying to go after. But I just don't know if cap structure-wise it makes a lot of sense.
Hawks are one team, Greg's.
Yeah, it might almost be too early in their rebuild for them, Brian. They might need a few other crap picks, as you talked about earlier.
Well, they're going to get a pretty good one at number 2 overall. So
no, they will, right? But that's only 2,
fine.
Right? I'm going to say the Nashville Predators. Nashville has they got Philip Forsberg, but you need more than one big offensive gunner. And that would be the team. I think they've got some defensemen that, now obviously I'm not saying Roman Josi, but they got some other defensemen that might intrigue. And Mitch Marner, Nashville, everybody knows players enjoy playing there, right? So you could, Ryan O'Reilly could have a conversation with him about that if need be. So I'm going to go with the Nashville Predators, a team that needs another offensive producer.
Next one, I'm going to go from the top of Frank's list all the way down to the bottom. There is a blank % chance that Trevor Zegras, who is 20th on the list, gets moved. Gregor, what do you think the chances are Zegras gets moved this summer?
Man, there's smoke, there's fire. I could see that move coming. And it might be one that they regret later on. But Pat Verbeek, to me, I don't think he's scared to make a big move. And just, I don't know. You read the tea leaves. I haven't heard anything negative. I haven't heard anything glowing though either. About Zegras from them. So I'm gonna say, God, I think it's 50-50. I think there's a pretty good chance he gets moved.
That's high. I would say 30%.
Okay.
I explained the reasoning and rationale on Daily Faceoff Live yesterday, and that is there's been a lot of pain points for Trevor Zegras so far on his end. He was injured last year. He was ground down on the RFA negotiations. His best friend was traded. He was one of the players pressured to work out in Florida under team control, which ultimately earned the Ducks a $50,000 fine. And then on the other end, we've heard, you mentioned not glowing, like Pat Verbeek, I think he's not going to say it publicly. I think internally the talk has been that they have real reservations as to whether or not he can add additional dimensions to his game. Is he a talented, creative offensive force? Yes. Are there other things that he needs to add to his game? Yes. And when you have, a bunch of young burgeoning prospects, the need to try and force square peg into round hole, if that's how you view him, isn't really there. Leo Carlson's there, Cutter Gauthier, Mason McTavish. Go through the list. They've got a whole bunch of really impressive players on the way.
Last one I got for you guys. It's about the goalie market. We got Linus Ullmark at number 2. You have UC Saros at 6, Philip Gustafsson at 8, Jacob Markstrom at 10, and Elvis Merzlikins down at 16. The most intriguing goaltending situation for you is blank, Frank.
Well, you're talking about reigning Vezina Trophy winner in Ullmark. You're talking about a guy who agreed to waive his no trade in Markstrom. You're talking about Saros, who many view as a top 5 game breaker in net. But I'm going to go off the board and I'm going to say Philip Gustafsson, because if I'm looking at the goaltending market, that's the guy I would target for my team to try and find a difference maker. He's going to be mid-tier in cap price. 2 more years at $375 is never going to hurt you. And he's going to be mid-tier in terms of acquisition cost. I think of goaltending like voodoo. You really don't know what you're going to get year in and year out. Saros and Ullmark are as close to the guarantees as you can get. But that being said, new team, new situation, new defense in front of him. Like, there's a whole bunch of variables here that 1 year ago at this time, Gustafsson's coming off of an unbelievable year in which he saved the Wild season. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, this guy is readily available. They've got Marc-Andre Fleury coming back for his 40-year-old season. Jesper Wallstedt, their 2021 first-round pick. He's ready to go. They don't need Gustafsson, and they need cap space. That's the guy I'd be going after.
Craig's out of those 4, who stands out to you?
Yeah, well, it's hard for me to overlook Ullmark just because it's a significant move. But I will say this:
you got to pay him though.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And you got to pay Saros,
right?
What are you paying these guys? What's their next AAV?
Well, look at the recent goalie contracts, right? How is it going to be that big? And when you consider, like the big, they look at starters and like, yeah, okay, but 25 games and for your backup? It's a good question, Frank, but I don't know if he's going to get I don't think he's getting a huge, massive raise. I don't think he's getting $8 million or anything like that. So it's a good question, but I'm really intrigued.
You don't think he's getting closer to 8 than he's already at 5?
Yeah,
and he won a Vezina and has had some unbelievable seasons. He's got to be in the 7.5 to 8 range all day long.
Yeah, see, I was thinking 7.
Even that's still a lot to pay a goalie. There are some teams that pay 7 total and are perfectly comfortable.
No, but I guess I look at it remember a few years ago, Bobrovsky was 10 and Price was 10 and Vasilevsky was 9.5. But now it's it's the one position where the top end guys aren't getting more than the top end guys, right? Top defensemen are getting more than the previous guys. Top forwards are
that's not necessarily true.
Well, Connor McDavid's not the highest paid guy in the league. Right?
But look at the defense market. And I only have this on the top of my head because we just smashed Darnell Nurse for 24 hours earlier this week at $9.25 million. They go Seth Jones 9.5, Zach Werenski 9.58, Darnell Nurse 9.25, and then a few weeks after that, Morgan Riley resets the market at 7.5.
Yeah, but I don't think Riley's didn't really ever have the offensive numbers of those guys.
How many defensemen outside of Cale Makar have gotten a number that's in the 9s or plus?
Well, who's been up for contract lately that's due, right? That's, I think, the thing.
But we're talking about a 3-year period of time. That those contracts were all signed in July, August, and September of 2021. It's 2024. The defense market has not gone up and up. And I would say in return, everyone's getting smarter on goaltending. The numbers are going down.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. That's why I think it's closer to 7.
But my point is, you could pay 7 to him, or you could get close to that goal level of goaltending for half of that at Gustafsson at 3.75.
Sure. Do you think he's as good? That's the question. Like you said, it's voodoo. I don't know, but I'll say this: the New Jersey Devils, to me, are the team to watch and what they're going to do with their goaltending.
100%.
I'm very intrigued by what the Devils do with their goaltending. You mentioned UC Saros. If UC Saros is in play, man, for 1 year at $5 million, he might be the best value deal in the NHL for 1 year. So go after.
But you have to give up your right arm to get him, and then if you want to keep him, you need to pay him.
But do you? Which goalies? That's what's crazy about goalies. They don't get a lot in trades historically. It's weird.
That's the Preds, the Flames, and the Bruins have all made it known. You want our guy, you're paying a haul.
Yeah, well, that's what they can say that, Frank, but history says sure, but we won't do it. Because
the market is kind of thin in general. So which teams need a goalie? It's Ottawa, New Jersey, LA, and Toronto. Am I missing anyone?
Yeah, but Toronto, I think they look at, well, we got Wall. We know he's injured. Do we want to go big into one, or do we want to tandem, right? I don't know.
That's always been Brad Treliving's style, is to get a big name guy. He's the one who signed Markstrom to that deal. And maybe that would make sense to trade for Markstrom. Guy you'd be comfortable with.
Frank, would Philly be interested in a goalie?
Nope.
Okay.
They got Fedotov.
Yeah, I guess Fedotov's coming.
And they just signed him to a $3.5 million deal.
That is correct. All right. Well, that is a wrap. Only you guys can spend 3.5 minutes arguing about whether Ullmark should get 7 or 7.5 on his next deal. That's a wrap. Show it to Wendy's once again.
I guess.
Well, we'll see, though.
That's not how I view that argument, but sure.
Yeah. No. It's fine. But it is funny as, you're right. I think they realize the goalie tandems, they don't want to go big. And for whatever reason, that position from year to year, outside of maybe a select 4 or 5.
There's 7 goalies that you can hang your hat on.
Is there 7?
Do you want me to name them?
Well, Shesterkin, Saros.
Hellebuck, Shesterkin, Saros, Sorokin, Vasilevsky, Demko, and
the last
Ullmark,
few years, you'd have to put.
I'd go Ullmark, Swayman as 1 because they've each only played 40-some games.
Bobrovsky's pretty good the last few years for Florida. Like he had a little bit.
Really
of a dip,
wasn't until they got to the playoffs last year. Yeah. Remember, Alex Lyon was their Game 1 playoff starter in 2023.
Yeah, and that's like the year they had Holtby, who didn't start the series and didn't start the playoffs, and they went and won the cup. So, yeah. Now, what about Binnington? Some would say Binnington. I know Kevin Woodley loves his numbers in St. Louis.
His numbers were great. He had a fantastic year. I don't think anyone's taken that contract.
Yeah. So.
Even as well as he played, they might take him and the contract, but they're not going to give you anything for it. And then the next, so it was Binnington, and then there was a couple other people. Oh, Merzlikins. What happens with him? Don Waddell kind of addressed that in his press conference, saying, hey, we've got to find a way to see if we can get him right. Because I think he understands, in parentheses, that was his way of saying, this guy doesn't really have any trade value.
And by the way, Rasmus Dahlin went up to 11 mil recently, right? That's a pretty big jump for defenseman.
Okay. I'm saying, but there aren't many.
Yeah. Because it's like a lot of them are already like Erik Karlsson was already locked up at whatever he is, 11 and a half. I can't remember.
Was, one of the worst contracts we've seen.
But there are lots of D-men coming up for deals here, like in the near future.
Evan Bouchard, he's going to be 10 plus.
Now, Adam Fox, how many years he got left?
Yeah, there's all sorts of good questions. Fox has a bunch of years left at 9.5. He's got 5 years left at 9.5.
Yeah. I know there'll be lots of guys. Bouchard's going to be getting a big raise. Good for him. Frankie, I know you got to do your other show and then try to have a nap. And we will see so here's my question, Frank. Are we going game 7s?
Nope. I say both series end in 6.
Ooh. And who are you taking?
I'm going to go Panthers and Oilers. But I want to know, before I'm fully answering that question, what is the status of Chris Tanev?
Chris Tanev, yeah.
I'm not saying one player. It hinges on one player, but that was a major, major comeback for the Oilers. That was character. That was the signature win of the Connor McDavid era. And it might only be the signature win of the era for this week.
Yeah. We'll see if they make it through. Should be good. Have a good one, Matt. That was the rundown, of course, always brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. You can open an account at Bet365 and be sure to use the promo code DAILY365 to bet on huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Have a great day.